Greetings, this is Justin with DustOffTheBible.com. Today, we're going to be talking about the Devil's Brew. Did Jesus drink alcohol? Are we allowed to drink alcohol? Let's discuss. Alright guys, now we get down to the fun stuff. We have 3 questions that we really need to answer. The first question is, are there any Old Testament prohibitions against wine? The next question is, did Jesus drink wine? If so, was it alcoholic? And the last question, did Christians drink wine? And what do the New Testament writers say about it? I think these 3 questions will tell us a lot about how we should behave. So let's move on to the first question. First, how should we understand wine in light of the Old Testament? In Exodus 29:40, there are instructions on how to use wine for sacrificial purposes. Now this is what you shall offer on the altar. 2 one-year-old lambs each day continuously. The one lamb you shall offer in the morning, and the other lamb you shall offer at twilight. And there shall be 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with 1/4 of a hin of beaten oil, 1/4 of a hin of wine, yayin, for a drink offering with one lamb. The Lord is instructing them to place wine on the altar. And by using the Hebrew word yayin, we're referring to an alcoholic wine as opposed to a non-alcoholic wine, tirosh. Now we see a parallel to this in the New Testament. Jesus makes use of this symbology in Luke 22, verse 20. He picked the cup and he said, "This cup which is poured out for you is the new covenant in my blood." We see it coming up again, referenced by Paul the Apostle in Philippians 2:17. But even if I am being poured out as a drink offering upon the sacrifice of service of your faith, rejoice and share my joy with you all. The drink offering was a very common thing in Jewish society and culture. Now what about other Old Testament references to wine? Many people bring up the instance of Aaron's sons who were killed by the Lord for drinking wine and then entering into the Holy of Holies, offering incense. Afterwards, there was a prohibition against drinking wine, getting drunk, and then entering into the Holies of Holies in order to protect those who were entering. Many have said that this is a prohibition against all wine for all people at all times. However, this is a great misuse of the passage, as the passage is clear that it is merely to protect people so they don't die upon entering the holy place. Do not enter in a drunken manner, which is disrespectful to the Lord. Let's also take a look at Proverbs 23:20. Do not join those who drink too much wine or gorge themselves on meat, for drunkards and gluttons become poor, and drowsiness clothes them in rags. In Isaiah 5:11 it says, "Woe to those who rise early in the morning to run after their drink, who stay up late at night till they are inflamed with wine. They have harps and lyres at their banquets, tambourines, flutes, and wine. But they have no regard for the deeds of the Lord, no respect for the work of his hands." Once again, the real issue with alcohol in the Old Testament is the misuse of alcohol. But it is clear that the Jews used alcohol, alcoholic wine that is, in almost all of their feasts. They used alcohol in Passover, in almost all of their sacrifices in the temple or previously in the tabernacle. They were all accompanied by alcoholic wine indicated in the Hebrew as yayin. Now the Old Testament does include positive references to wine. For example, in Psalm 104:14 through 15, the Lord makes plants for man to cultivate, bringing forth food from the earth. Wine, yayin, that gladdens the heart of man, oil to make his face shine, and bread to sustain his heart. Of course, the word for wine here is the alcoholic version, yayin. Let's also take a look at Ecclesiastes 9:7. Go, eat your food with gladness. Drink your wine with a joyful heart, for it is now that God favors what you do. Wine, of course, is still yayin, alcoholic wine. Now, some have claimed that Jesus, at the wedding of Cana, transformed water into non-alcoholic wine. Their proof is usually some sort of word association game trying to prove that it would have been wrong for Jesus to do so. While there is no prohibition against Jesus drinking or turning water into alcoholic wine, I don't think we need to do any type of systematic theology to figure out what Jesus did. All we merely have to do is look at the Greek language to see what Jesus was turning the water into. Greek has clearly defined words for wine. There are actually 4 of them. We're really only concerned with 2. The 2 that we're going to be looking at today is winos, which is an alcoholic wine. It's the most common form of wine, and the majority of the times where wine is mentioned in the New Testament is going to turn up as winos. There's another type of wine called new wine in English. In Greek, it's very simply translated as neos winos, which is new wine. There's a third type of wine that is also non-alcoholic. This is usually also referred to as new wine in English. It is the counterpart to the Hebrew word tirosh, which is wine that has been freshly pressed or freshly squeezed from the grape. Some have tried to say that this is the wine Jesus had made at the wedding in Cana. First, let me quickly note that even if it was glucose, it doesn't necessarily mean it wasn't alcoholic. For example, when the disciples were accused of being drunk on the day of Pentecost, they are accused of drinking glucose. Typically, it's not heavily fermented. However, obviously, even though it was new wine or it was sweet wine, glucose could have had some level of fermentation. Thereby, being accused of drinking such glucose on the day of Pentecost, the disciples were thought to have been drunk. However, the majority of the time, glucose is not heavily fermented. It would be very difficult to get drunk off of. Now, what did Jesus turn the water into? Did he turn it into glucose, or did he turn it into winos? Well, the answer is simple. He turns the wine into winos. Now, the next thing about the wedding at Cana, which comes up quite often, is the fact that they clearly weren't getting drunk. For example, when the head waiter exclaims that you've saved the better wine for after the guests have freely drunk, the word to drink is different than the word to get drunk. So the word that we use during the wedding at Cana was metheo. This is strictly used in the New Testament and in other Greek texts to mean getting drunk or to be drunk or to be in a state of drunkenness. However, there is a word for drinking, and that is pino. When someone is said to be drinking and the verb pino is used, we know that it's literally referring to drinking. When someone is said to have been drinking, like Jesus was, and the word pino is used, it literally just means drinking. When someone is said to be drinking and the word metheos is used, we know that they're drinking some sort of alcoholic beverage. So what happens at Jewish weddings? First, they bring out the good wine. Typically, the guests drink freely of this until they are slightly intoxicated. And then once they are slightly intoxicated, the poorer wine comes out. This, of course, is why the head waiter was surprised that Jesus saved the best wine for last. Now let's move on to our last question. Did the Christians, the early church, drink wine, or did they drink grape juice? We're going to see in Corinthians that they clearly were drinking alcoholic wine. Let's read from 1 Corinthians 11, 20 through 22. Therefore, when you meet together, it is not to eat at the Lord's Supper, for in your eating each one takes his own supper first. Therefore, when you meet together, it is not to eat the Lord's Supper, for in your eating each one takes his own supper first. And one is hungry, and another is drunk. Drunk being Matteo, do you not have houses in which to eat and drink? Clearly, Paul is upset, not so much that they're drinking wine, but so much that people are showing up early, taking advantage of the fact that they're not day laborers. They're higher up on the food chain. They're eating the food, and they're drinking the wine in excess. And then when the day laborers, the poorer, the lower society, comes in for the Lord's Supper, there's nothing left for them. Early on in Christian tradition, it's clear that they're using real wine at the suppers. That'll pretty much wrap it up on our alcohol discussion. If you have any questions, feel free to visit dustoffthebible.com. You can email me at admin@dustoffthebible.com. There's also a contact page on the website. Of course, you can also leave a comment in the section below. Thank you for watching.